Hey CIE 401, we've made it to week 12, which is pretty exciting, and we're talking about sort of these issues of cultural imperialism or liberation and how that happens through globalization, and specifically how that occurs through the media. Now, I wanted to remind you that this week's in-class session will be entirely dedicated to the student-led group discussion of the book Unsettled Belonging. That means that class is going to be the full 3 hours, and so you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And there is, of course, still reading. It's 46 pages out of your Globalization reader, the whole part on globalization and media. And there's also an optional reading by Jan called Globalization of Media, Key Issues and Dimensions, which gives you just sort of a summary of the different theoretical and empirical ways of thinking about globalization in the media. It's not education specific, but I thought it would be a nice complement to the kinds of things that we've been talking about in class, as well as that you'll be discussing or thinking about through the modules for today. So the modules are still going to be focused on globalization and media, even though our discussion is going to be about the book that the class is leading, or the group is leading. And we're going to start off with a module on globalized media and education, and specifically looking at the ways that curriculum and sort of the processes of education have been globalized. That comes both through what we're talking about in terms of the knowledge society or the information society in the prelude to this module, but also in thinking about the ways that this knowledge society or information society is embedding curriculum with a particular culture, and whose culture is that? Who controls the information or the knowledge that's being disseminated? Same thing with the outcomes-based education. We're going to look at sort of the South African context here to consider how outcomes-based education was a process of teaching and learning that was not necessarily an indigenous process to South Africa, but that was imposed, or if you go to the extreme route, or provided, if you want to go a more gentle route, to South Africa after the end of apartheid. And it posed both a lot of potentials for educators and students, as well as a lot of challenges. The problem was that it was a way of distributing information, both using media and curriculum and teaching methods and other things, that was not necessarily a local tradition or an indigenized approach. So that will be one thing that you want to consider. How does media and how does globalization play into both the content as well as the process, and how does the idea of a knowledge society embed itself in that broader understanding? Then for our second module, we're going to be looking at language as a mechanism of media dominance. And there's really only, there is only one short video about why has English developed as a world language. There's a whole host of information that's available out there around language and globalization, and especially the idea of imperialism or colonization. And so that's one of the things that I want you to think about here is how does media either reproduce the inequalities that were established by historical colonial legacies, or how does media itself become a new version of cultural imperialism? I'm a very fortunate person because I happen to be born in and grow up in a country and a culture that has one of the world's dominant languages as its native language. Yay for English speakers, I guess. So why has English developed as a world language? Why is that the way that it is? And is that also part of this knowledge economy or knowledge society or information society, and the way that that knowledge society is either dominated or controlled by particular cultural, political, or economic groups worldwide? And then our final module for this week is looking at social media, the internet, and globalization. And we've got a video from a Harvard professor who's going to be talking about the internet, globalization, and the future of media. And then I'd also like for you to read what's being called a manifesto that Mark Zuckerberg put out, I think, back in February of 2017, called Building Global Community. It's a really interesting statement from someone who has if you're not aware, pretty well known for founding Facebook. And it goes right along with our idea of how social media, the internet, plays into global community building and globalization more broadly speaking. One of the things that isn't addressed very directly in the reading or in the video for this module is the way that education, and formal mass education in particular, facilitates globalization through the use of social media and the internet. But I will rely on you to use your own experiences with technology and the internet and social media and how that's been used in classrooms or as a part of formal learning opportunities in schools and classrooms, both in your own experience as well as in other situations that you might be familiar with. So how does global dissemination of the media enlighten or enslave generations of youth, both in and through formal mass education, as well as outside of it? It's a big question, but it's one to consider, certainly worth considering. I want you to prepare for class this week by reflecting on the week's objectives while you read the section from Lechner and Bolai's book, and also while you read the optional reading, if you do choose to read it. And then while you watch and read the preparation materials in the modules above, and especially as you prepare to participate in this week's discussion of Abu al-Hajjah's book that's being led by your classmates. That's going to be a really important preparation for you. And come ready to help out the group that's leading the discussion of the book by being as engaged as possible. Look forward to seeing you soon. Take it easy.